Since when?
Last several weeks, at least with us. I don't know how long that means before that. Doesn't go back to Oberlin until January 4th because they have a new trimester system in order to have have 3/4 of the students. Everyone gets a single.
Okay, welcome everybody to the final town hall of this series, where we are taking this opportunity to get input and insight from the Einstein community as to how we can work together to improve both our culture inside our institution and outside of our institution, understanding the kind of national and international conversation that's going on right now around structural racism and the fact that everybody has a role to play in correcting this issue. So just to give you a little preamble to orient you for those who haven't been on a town hall before, this is being recorded and will be transcribed, and the recordings and the transcriptions will be available on the Diversity at Einstein website once completed. And I'll also be putting together a summary of action items. And the goal for this is really so that we don't lose anybody's voice in this process. Since some of us are in the live space and some of us are in the virtual space, what I'd ask those who want to speak in the virtual space to do is type into the chat that you'd like to speak or put an asterisk, and then we'll be able to make sure that we're not missing out on anybody. But you are also free to unmute yourself and speak directly if there's a comment that you wanted to follow up on or to address. I've appreciated some of the questions that people put in at the time of registration and have grouped some of those into themes. If we do not get to the comment that you put in, just know that, again, those are all being recorded and documented and freely available, and we'll go into the summary as well. Just like to start with some introductions of some people here in the conference room, and then if some of the Einstein leadership who's joined us virtually can also introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So I'm Nara Spenfield. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion.
Sherry Robertson, Project Coordinator, Human Resources.
Good afternoon, Josh Nisanchuk, Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education.
Allison Ludwig, Associate Dean for Student Affairs.
Hi. Kristen Williams, fourth year medical student and SNMA Region 9 Director.
Irene Blanco, Associate Dean for Diversity Enhancement.
I'm Daniel Vera, I'm the IT Solutions Coordinator.
All right. I'm just going to point out people I see on the screen. Gordon.
Hey, Nereus, Gordon Tomaselli, I'm Dean. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks for joining, everybody.
And Pablo. You're muted.
Pablo Ho, Associate Dean for Medical Education Compliance.
Victoria.
Hi, I'm Victoria Friedman, Associate Dean for Graduate Programs.
And I can't see anybody else from the Dean's office. If you're on, please speak up. Okay.
Steve
All right.
Baum, Office of Student.
That was Steve Baum. Okay. And that's going to be it. All right, perfect. So I wanted to start one of the themes from the comments put forward, and because I see some curriculum people on the screen, is a question about how the curriculum can be used to address institutional racism. So from Emily Bruder, we have, how does Einstein plan to implement change in the curriculum to enhance education on institutional racism in the medical field so students are able to better recognize injustices and avoid perpetrating them? Christian Escalera says, what are the curriculum changes that are being proposed? And Marla Fisher says, when is curriculum reform going to happen? We wanted to start discussing that more. If anyone that if I stated your comment and you want to add to it or restate it in your own words, please go ahead and unmute yourself and speak now. Okay. So I wanted to say that actually some of this discussion just came up this morning in a Dean's Committee as well. And it's, I think, grounded in understanding of the importance of the medical school as a central part of the work that we do, education being a foundational tenet of the work that we do, and a clear demand from the students for more education and skills building as to how they can be more kind of anti-racist and aware in their profession and in their lives and in the service that they provide. So, Josh, to put you on the spot, do you want to talk about a couple of things that you mentioned this morning?
So there were a lot of different issues that you brought up. And first I would say that both for the MD program and I'll speak for Victoria, the graduate school, we're continually innovating our curriculum. It's not something that stands still. And we are launching in the first year something that we've been working on for well over a year, a new course that's specifically focused on population health that's going to be run by Lottie Oki, who's in the Department of Family Medicine. In terms of what we were talking about earlier today, it really gets to the fact that we're a community. And yes, we have different pieces, but can we target some of these activities as more of a continuum from the MD to the MSTP to the graduate schools to the students to the postdocs, and put together a curriculum that really engages all the different learners at our school instead of in pockets. One of the things that the PhD, MSTP, and the postdocs have to do as an NIH requirement is a responsible conduct of research, where they use some lectures, but they also have very nice case studies that you work through to figure out appropriate ways of addressing sometimes extremely difficult situations. And could we as an institution establish something like that for our learners that would be longitudinal and, depending on the group, built on in further years of the curriculum? So I would love to see us tackle this as an entirety and not in pieces, to really take a more holistic approach as an institution.
Marla's on. I don't know if you want to, Marla wants to say anything, because that was one of her comments.
Oh. Marla, I had spoken out your comment that you had put in about questioning the curricular change. Do you want to add your own words to that right now? Not to put you on the spot. You're still muted.
Thank you. Yeah, I had submitted a question about curricular reform because I know in response to past marginalized student organizing, there was all of this work that got done to actually figure out like how to teach health disparities, like how to engage like LGBTQ, racial, other diversity issues, and a lot of marginalized faculty and students put a lot of unpaid time into writing that curriculum, and then it seems like it just kind of went away and wasn't a priority. And so I wanted to know, like, if there are curricular changes that come out of this process, how, like, what are the commitments and where is the accountability that it's going to actually occur, and who's going to be doing it? Because I don't think it's right or fair to kind of put it on people to do, like, it can't just be students.
And for those who were involved in this process previously, where did it feel like the barriers arose to implementation?
You mean like for curriculum reform?
Yeah, so if you know there was this work done to do a kind of wide and deep, it sounds like, assessment of ways to enhance the population health and health disparities curriculum within, and then
What was the barrier?
yeah.
I mean, from my perspective, having led significant portions of that charge during curriculum reform, I would say when it was suspended indefinitely in June of 2017, and that for me was a seemed to be a currently formidable barrier.
I would also say that it's taken, I mean, Marla knows because Marla took the DCRC course, the Diversity and Culturally Responsive Care Selective, but that's the key word. We teach some of those things there to up to 30 students who can sign up, but it's all, it's not a mandatory course that all students need to take and learn or master or actually practice skills in all of these topics. And the executive committee has actually there's been presentations to the executive committee who usually receive it very well and always question, why is this not part of the requisite curriculum for everybody? Shouldn't everybody be practicing culturally responsive care along the way? But it never moves beyond that desire.
Sounds like someone unmuted themselves to speak. So I think one of the questions for me is, because this has come up before, how do we regain that trust of the people who contributed and put a lot of work into these efforts in the past to make it feel like, this time it's really going to stick? Because I think that's part of the challenge that we've had, right, with not just within the institution and not just around curriculum, but on a larger scale, right? Everyone gets enthusiastic and sends out statements, and then when it comes to the actual transformative work, it feels like it never really gets pushed through.
Yeah, hi, Vic Schuster. There was an enormous effort at curriculum redesign, and many, many, many people in many different areas. Josh was in the room with us, lots of other people that I see on the call, Pablo, and it essentially all got suddenly dropped, and minor tweaks were done across the curriculum. So I don't know that this sector was necessarily dissed or dropped or treated all that differently from all kinds of other really significant and thoughtful parts of curriculum redesign. It's just that there are some parts of what we all did that probably should be picked up and reintegrated, and this would be one of them. But
let me just comment briefly. This was before I arrived, and I was made aware of the work that was done. And at the same time, we were trying to gain full candidate status from middle states. And it was felt that a large curriculum reform of any type was not what we wanted to do at a time when we were doing a self-study. That was one of the reasons that was given to me. I think there are things that we should probably resurrect from that work that was done, and other things that Josh and you talked about this morning that can be done now. We are in the final stages of our application for middle states full accreditation, and hope that will be, that'll be complete. Really, the work's already done, and that'll be granted hopefully by middle of 2021. But that doesn't preclude us from really working on curriculum reform now.
how much of this work exists? Like, do we have archives of all of this? Do we, I mean, you know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel here for sure. Do you know within OME, do we still have a lot of this stuff?
I don't have what Marla was talking about. I have what the part that Vic Schuster was talking about.
Yeah, we actually have we have all this stuff. It's Dropbox folders. We have some of it actually became curriculum. We had to work around it. Like the LGBT longitudinal health curriculum really exists, and it started out as an idea for the future, but we were able to create 7 hours of content. Again, not significant. A lot of the what is now the 8 hours for the foundations of population health, actually the nexus of that actually was from curricular reform. There was supposed to be sort of a 101 course for population health, and I know Christina knows this because we all worked on it together, Heather as well. And part of this training, like anti-racism training, implicit bias training, health literacy training, was all going to be part of a curriculum where CBSL, which is now a voluntary process, was actually be part of the requisite curriculum. But students would all have to take this requisite material before actually having any contact with the community or with patients. Those are like the underpinnings that were required.
So just to put something in context that Pablo raised, is 7 hours is actually a significant amount of time in our curriculum. If you look at the course that Irene Blanco ran on all of musculoskeletal systems of being 30 hours long, in proportion, it's actually a decent amount of time. So it's how we use time, what's appropriate, how do we integrate? That's really something we need to think about. We have a limited amount of hours and we need to use them impactfully.
I mean, I think it's, you know, it's what we choose to prioritize as well, and what we feel, or what students are telling us they feel that they want to be the providers of the future, right? To be the clinicians who are able to serve in the way that they want to serve. For any students on the call, if you're willing to lend your voice at this moment to the conversation, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, so I'll speak up for some of the students and just express some of the frustration that I've heard from my Black friends in med school and from some of my URM friends. First of all, I do think we all believe that there is ample space in the curriculum. I think I know this is, I don't know what goes into curriculum reform, but considering that we go to med school in the Bronx and work with a diverse community, I think we all strongly believe that this is essential to our training now more than ever. And just to voice some of the frustrations of a lot of my Black friends specifically, I think they're grateful that this is being brought to the forefront now and that administrators are reaching out to them, specifically ones who didn't necessarily show that they expressed interest. So for example, Office of Diversity does so much work and offers so much support, but other administrators who didn't seem to care are now reaching out. And that's great, but a lot of my friends have expressed that obviously being a med student is a full-time job, and being an underrepresented med student is even harder. And I guess to feel like the weight of representing an entire race is on you, and to advocate for your race and spend that time that you also need to be dedicating to forwarding your own career. I think I just wanted to express that message because I think from a lot of students there's the opinion that a lot of this should be the priority of the admin to advocate for students. Thank you.
We have Liz Twong had wanted to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly point out that, one of the ways that we make sure that we prioritize things in the curriculum is having them explicitly stated as competencies or sub-competencies. And there was I thought, a quite powerful perspective in New England Journal this week calling for incorporating mastering the health effects of structural racism as an explicit medical competency. And I was wondering if there could be some process for us to, I don't know how we go about modifying our competencies, but that might be a way that we can keep this at the center when we're prioritizing curricular elements.
And then Victoria Sedgwick wanted to, yeah, I mean, I think we can be at the forefront of this movement, right? I believe that there are many institutions who are, and the LCME is getting more and more explicit in their social determinants of health as a core knowledge as a core competency now. So I think this transition is happening, and it would be exciting if we could be at the forefront of it. Victoria Sedgwick.
Hi, everyone. So I'm not a medical student, and I'm not really certain all the workings around this curriculum reform, but as a Black woman who will be subject to medical treatment, there are some worries that I do have with what's being taught to medical students. I have experienced care. I apologize, there's a lot of noise outside of my room. But I have experienced care from alumni from this school, and they've even expressed that they don't really understand why people in this Bronx community, Black and brown people, are the way that they are in regards to the poverty and some of the situations that they find themselves in, as well as how they take care of themselves. So what I'm wondering regarding this curriculum reform is the history of healthcare in this country going to be incorporated into these courses? And also, what are we doing as a school to combat some of the racial stereotypes embedded into medicine, such as how Black people do not feel pain? Because these previous teachings are still being perpetuated by medical institutions, not necessarily by our school, but it's absolutely a detrimental effect to Black and brown bodies. So yeah, will this type of information be incorporated into the courses?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I think that this is part of the conversation that we're having right now. Certainly the population health course is in development as we speak. What we are hoping to do is ensure that, one, there's no evidence of bias throughout not just bias, but outdated teachings around race throughout our curriculum. And also, wanting to make the time that we do have as impactful as possible.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Karen Rogers. I'm a faculty member in PEDS and psychiatry. I am not an MD, but have been at the institution for over 11 years now. And I guess I just haven't paid as direct attention to the curriculum, but I'm shocked to find that it is not a part of a curriculum when the institution is in the Bronx, or not a part of the standard curriculum. I understand that there are requisites placed by governing and licensing institutions, and licensing organizations, but I'm curious, is this something that was, I think Pablo was saying that there were electives that people could choose to do, but there was never a component that was a part of the standard curriculum. Is that correct?
I think, Pablo, you had wanted to speak anyway, so can you respond to that and then?
Oh yeah, no, most of the content that I'm aware of has actually been more on the elective type side. So again, while we do have offerings, we have an implicit bias elective, we have, again, the DCRC, but these are all sort of elective experiences when we have to question the kind of doctors that we want to see and that we want to put out that are patient-centered and are meeting the needs of the communities that we care for. It seems insufficient and inappropriate to only be doing it for 20 or 30 students maximum. It should be all. And it should be a competency, a required competency of every student who graduates.
But the Bronx factor doesn't concern anybody? I don't mean it, that's not the right way to ask it, but
I'm sorry, Karen, we didn't hear what you said. Go ahead.
I'm saying, I guess I'm just kind of taken aback. Like I would just think here in particular, and
So
given
to clarify, it is.
Wait, just so I can finish. So here in particular, and given the context of the institution itself as a social justice institution, it's just something that, you know, I like, as everybody's saying, it's something that we're going to revisit and definitely needs to prioritize. But I would just think that that factor alone, the community that we serve in particular, would make it an even higher priority outside of all that's going on in the world, but that it would be a high priority to be a part of the regular, you know, and not just the elective curriculum.
So to clarify, it is part of our curriculum. It's more of a longitudinal theme. It's woven throughout the different courses. For example, Christina Gonzalez, who's on the screen here, during orientation for the past several years, has given a session on implicit bias. So right during the first week, we do that. We have an entire day dedicated to the Bronx community where Heather Archer Dyer talks about the Bronx. We have an individual who's either a state or city congressperson or official leader who comes in and talks to the students, and they go on a tour of the Bronx as well. There is a specific logo that says PHPM, Population Health, that gets put onto slides in the first 2 years when there's a topic that addresses this content. There are also parts on medical economics, understanding how healthcare is funded that are interwoven through the system. I think the point is that we need to do better, not that we haven't done anything. So I just want to put that clarification out there. So other things that we've introduced this year for the new third-year students, because you're from pediatrics, one of the pediatric structural determinants of health person gave an entire morning session on structural determinants of health for our new incoming third years, where they had some cases and they worked through some of those cases. And then he was available again for an hour in the evening where we went over questions that had derived from that session. So we are actively building these things in. It's not just a last minute shotgun.
No, I understand that, but those are still ways in which it's, you know, there's a person coming in and giving a special talk on a special day is not the same thing as, and again, it's not a criticism, like you said. I mean, it's something that has to be built upon. I just was in listening was just kind of like, but this is the Bronx. How is this not already a part of what we would do, where another institution, maybe somewhere in rural America that doesn't serve the type of population that we have, maybe now they would be triggered to think about it differently, but that as an institution like ours, that we would already be doing it. So, I mean, but I understand what you're saying. It makes sense. I'm following, but I do agree with a lot of the consensus. I know, you know, Christina, Pablo have done a lot of work. And so as we're moving forward, really thinking about how do we tangibly make it more than just a talk here or somebody coming and giving a presentation there, how does it, you know, using the efforts that Pablo and Christina have done and others to really integrate it into the curriculum and being on the forefront of that, I think, as Inaris was saying, would be really great.
I agree with Dr. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to call on you, honey, so go ahead.
Okay. I agree with Dr. Rogers, and I think, I mean, this is just my perspective, but having just gone through the first 2 preclinical years, I will say that what we've gotten within our classes seems incredibly inadequate. Most of my peers and I don't feel like any of this material has been addressed in most of our courses. And I think a good way to start, I don't know if this has been looked into, is having more diverse lectures. That's something that a lot of my friends have noticed. Specifically, some of my friends, I mean, it happens in every organ system, but in cardiology, having only white men lecture has made some of my friends not think of it as a potential career field for them because they don't see themselves represented. And also, we're in our virtual clerkships now, starting third year. A lot of these topics on social determinants of health and the Bronx community and how we relate to them in a way that is beneficial and healing is only now being addressed in our family medicine rotation. And I think that is in large part due to the fact that it is one of the more diverse groups of faculty, and it seems to me from experience that those are the people who care about these issues more. So I think one way to address this is increasing representation so that we could hear from more doctors who care about these issues and who look like patients who we're treating, because studies have shown that that's very beneficial, is having diversity in the medical field.
Yeah, something I wanted to add on to that is that, you know, I think that it's really great that we do have so much, like, you know, kind of sprinkled in between. But I think that it's really important that we have a dedicated space for it, because I think, you know, the way it is now, you know, it is very much that, you know, students who want to be part of it and the ones who already are kind of, you know, more inclined to be part of it are the ones who are engaging in it and taking it seriously. And like one thing that sticks out to me, like, is that during orientation, we had that wonderful presentation on implicit bias, but my class was the class that really, you know, was completely disrespectful and profane and, you know, really did not, yeah, did not take it seriously. And it was absolutely, I was horrified. I was absolutely horrified, and I don't remember it really being addressed. And I think that kind of speaks to the fact that this is something that, you know, our peers aren't being asked to deal with. It's kind of like voluntary. If you want to engage with it, you can. You know, otherwise you can make a mockery of all the work that Dr. Gonzalez has done, and that's not fair. And I think it needs to be more. You know, we have to. It's not enough just to, you know, have a course or have a lecture, rather, you know, here and there. I think those lectures are good, but, you know, only the students who really are already thinking about those things are really getting that knowledge.
Pablo, you had wanted to speak?
Sure. So I just wanted to briefly mention that as a medical education person, curriculum is beyond just like sessions that are taught, you know, beyond lectures and beyond workshops. The three things that are kind of important if we really want to make a difference, for one, is assessment. So assessing students on competencies. Assessments can also be biased. They can also be created in ways that are racist, whether intentional, unintentional. We have to have implicit bias training for people who, in terms of people who are grading students as well, just to be aware of the fact that, because we know, and we actually have data that actually shows that these things happen in clerkships. They happen the way that assessments are constructed. The other thing too is I recently met with the folks at Sinai who actually have a very small council that actually reviews all the course materials, all the content materials in clerkships, courses, et cetera. And they review the material looking for implicit bias, you know, cases that might be written in a very stereotypical way, cases that actually may actually not disclose the fact that the populations that were studied, that are being sort of presented forth, were not done in diverse populations. So there's all this invisible information, or that the data actually came from actual racist sources. And then finally, so they actually do that on a routine basis, making sure, and actually the way that it's done is that the curriculum is seen as belonging to the institution, and not just to the faculty, but also to the students. And that there's a priority in doing these type of reviews, because, you know, it's something, it would be a cultural shift for us to have to go there to do that. And then finally, there's the climate issue. So curriculum is also the learning climate, and the learning environment is made up of many moving parts. It's not just this topic, but clearly it does, like mistreatment, the hidden curriculum, the things, and the students will know this. You hear things in classes and courses, comments that are made out in the clinical world. You definitely hear comments made about the patients in the Bronx and the stereotypes. That's all the hidden curriculum that actually is sort of pounded over and over again. And I see them on evaluations when I read them. So there's more to it than just actual creating the teaching of it. There's a lot of other moving parts, and there's a lot of work to be done on all of those aspects.
And I think Destiny wanted to speak, and then I'd like to circle back to something that Pablo said as well.
Yeah, so I kind of just wanted to go off of what Kristen was saying a little bit earlier and kind of give my perspective as a now second-year student. You know, I know that I chose to come to Einstein because of the commitment to social justice, and that was something I was very attracted to over other schools. And I thought that, you know, right off the bat when we had orientation and we had this implicit bias training, and we had these tours around the Bronx, that this was something that my fellow classmates would be excited about and maybe actually internalize and think about this later on down the line. But I know specifically for the members of the Office of Diversity, this past year, I've experienced so many different forms of mistreatment just from my classmates. And I think a lot of that is because, you know, we do have every once in a while a lecture on how Black people are mistreated in healthcare or how certain other populations are being affected. But the problem is that it's not an ongoing conversation. It's just happening at these very short intervals when we show up to class, maybe in the last like 15 minutes when we're half asleep, and then we all leave and forget that any of this was talked about. And I think a lot of that too has to do with the fact that, you know, who are we admitting into our med school classes? If we're a school that's committed to social justice, is that something that is actually being looked at when we're admitting students? Because if I'm experiencing all these treatments, and many of my other friends that are URM students are experiencing them too, how are we actually going to be internalizing any of these like selective curricular changes or even formal curricular changes if we're not admitting students from these diverse backgrounds who are ready to engage in the curriculum? Thank you.
Destiny, you know, this incoming class thus far is working out to be our most diverse yet. And I think some of that is, we're knocking on wood. Some of that is, you know, some of the groundwork that has been laid, reaching out to our kind of non-traditional undergraduate institutions. Some of that has been some of the work that ODE and admissions have done around holistic admissions and making opportunities on interview days to engage students of color. And some of that we think, and we're working on a survey to try and figure this out, is because Einstein has been in the national conversation as a place where social justice is centered, especially in times of COVID. And I think my impression is that this incoming class is going to be even more committed to that mission and even more committed to service than any class we've had thus far. And we really do have to be prepared to live that talk right now. I wanted to circle back to something that Pablo said as well about the curriculum being more than just the curriculum, right? And the environment of learning being more than just the students. We've had a couple of people who wrote, Charles Query wrote, how can we provide more opportunities for culturally aware and cultural sensitivity for our faculty and our postdocs? Vic Schuster wrote, can we have like a weekly community opportunity, a film, you know, a film discussion every week? Like, how can we have this not just be a med school curriculum? How can we have this be a community curriculum as well, and a community message that members from the different schools, from the faculty, from the postdoc group, from our staff can contribute to? Someone's writing in.
Yeah,
Christina.
I could just amplify on that. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, it was your comment. Go ahead.
Well, I just, you know, we watched the James Baldwin film last night. You know, we saw 13th about a month ago. These are very profound films that we find ourselves, my wife and I, desperately wanting to talk about with our community of people, and we're sort of boxed in by COVID, and so we can't just really do it in the hallways and lunchroom and so forth and so on the way we ordinarily would feel that we would want to do so organically. And I just wondered if it might be a catalyst for people coming together around these topics.
Christina?
So I wanted to make 2 points. I think building on the points made about COVID, I think there's been a very clear conversation about COVID and its impact on racial disparities. And for those of us who've dedicated their careers to health equity, you know, it was surprising to see some of the surprise, both in the clinical community, but and not so much surprise in the lay press. But I think it's a excellent example of the that race is a social construct with biological consequences, right? And so there's not a genetic determinant of all these Black people in the Bronx and all these Latinos in the Bronx who are somehow have easier entry of the virus into their cells, right? So that's not the thing. And so that I think it's a really great opportunity to see that a virus that it was a lesson that was learned, and actually I've learned that was actually learned 10 years ago with H1N1. I was reading a paper that was brilliant. It was published in Annals, and it cited the paper that was written 10 years ago that basically was suggesting everything we should do now. And I have dedicated myself to making sure I can contribute to the conversation to affect change, right? To capitalize on this narrow window of political will at the state level, for example, for systemic change. And 10 years ago, I was starting my medical education fellowship, so I'll give myself a pass, but not this time. And so I think it's a really great opportunity for us to see, right? It's a social construct with biological consequences and the history, right? We're ahistorical as a society, all of us. And so somebody brought up the point about teaching about the history of why things are the way they are in the Bronx, and the historical and present day legacy of systemic racism, I think are important things that can be woven easily throughout when we're looking at our curriculum, right? It doesn't need a lot of minutes in any lecture. It's been done by others. It can be done here. And I think it can be done masterfully here, given the commitment of so many here. The other thing I wanted to say in terms of building on Pablo and Vic's comment about, wanting to have these conversations and also the curriculum not just being what we teach, right, in the formal curriculum, is that my team and I, we've designed interventions and have data for success for talking about bias, and the team, the feasibility of teams to talk about bias and be able to debrief, and the desire that people have, but because it's potentially emotionally charged, people don't really want to talk about it, right? Marla was one of my students in my first year running the implicit bias elective, came up with brilliant strategies that just left me floored. And we've learned, we've learned from our students, we've designed things through the science, and there's data. It can be done. It just needs to be approached at a bit of a holistic level, so that the students don't feel like they're carrying the mantle, they have their own careers to build, and the faculty also don't feel like they have to be experts in it, because they're experts in other things. And together we can meet. And there's educational theory that talks about that meeting together, the teacher-student and the student-teacher, to be able to co-construct effective instructional experiences.
Karen, you wanted to speak? Karen, are you still?
I'm here. No, I wasn't. I had put something in the chat about creating thinking groups, but.
I'm into that. What does that mean? Groups who think, yes.
Well, it's just the idea of like pairing. I mean, I think somebody else was saying it as well, but just pairing groups together for the students. So like as a part of, I don't know if it's, so you have to forgive me because I come from a psychology training and perspective, but it's the idea of like pairing. So part of the curriculum would be that you would have a class that is like seminar style, where there has to be, you divvy up who's there. So like you could invite, I don't know, you could have a dean there, and then you could have 4 or 5 students, you could have a couple of public health people. You would figure out what composition you want to create. And part of the class is going through different scenarios using different platforms and different, so it can be media like movies, newspapers, actual clinical examples and experiences. And it charges everybody to kind of reflect on those experiences that people have mentioned that they've had. So in a week's time, an experience that somebody has had that has been extremely offensive or extremely, it's kind of like a processing group, but the value of it is that you have more than just the students or students and a teacher. You have like a group that has agreed to do that for one semester or one session or whatever. I mean, I can send more details, talk more about it later, but it could be a way to work on that piece of like, it's not just teaching at people about different aspects, but actually having the space to ask the questions and have the conversations around the actual daily experiences.
Victoria, Cedric had wanted to speak.
Hi, I just want to endorse what Christina and Karen were saying. Christina had mentioned teaching history throughout the courses that are already present, and I think that that's something that definitely can be incorporated, because in my graduate school classes, depending on what we're learning, while we're learning what it's about, what the science is, we also are taught the history of its discovery, who discovered it, and all of that. So I definitely think that that's something that can be incorporated throughout the medical school courses that are already present, as well as how it intersects with different populations in America. And then in regards to the think tanks, is that the thinking groups? I also think that's a really great idea. We do something similar in the graduate school with our responsibilities and conducts course. In the latter half of the course, we separate into small groups and go through case studies discussing scientific like misuse of intellectual properties and like other issues that may pop up in academia. And we also have recently started discussing implicit bias. And those usually go over really well. You get to learn how people think, and sometimes people change their ideas surrounding a certain issue. And my department, the neuroscience department, also does this at our yearly retreat. So we do have a lot of discussions surrounding implicit bias. The language is coded, but that can definitely be changed. But I would definitely like to see that something to that degree for the entire Einstein community. And I think it's a great suggestion to also include other forms of media other than just case studies.
I think, you know, when we're talking about the larger curriculum too, it's not just in our education, but it's also in our research. I just wanted to highlight, I'm not sure if Michael Lipton is on the call, but I wanted to highlight something that he had written to say, addressing diversity in clinical research design and enrollment though a known issue, is still a largely unmet need, and moves to address this shortfall seem like a lot of words and much less actual change. This is where an area where we could have impact, and we should do more. And I think thinking about, you know, Victoria on the graduate side made me think, what about our research curriculum as well? And that how does that play into this larger conversation too? Michael, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to kind of add to your comment?
So, you know, I mean, in my own work, you know, a really important part of, you know, my own clinical populations is really trying to address, or at least trying to begin to address diversity. You know, a big focus of my own work has been looking at effects of gender. And, you know, there are, for example, even if you look, if we take this even out of Einstein, you know, to the federal level. So there is, you know, there's an office for research in women's health, and they've put out, for example, supplements to encourage the, you know, the augmentation of, you know, study and consideration of sex and gender in research. But it's really, you know, it's a very, I mean, there's an office, right? There's a program, but it's really ultimately is, you know, is pretty limited. And I think that, you know, similarly in our, you know, in our community, and, you know, I'm involved in the, you know, in the study of Latinos and some other studies that, you know, recruit heavily from the local community, and now have given us, you know, populations that are actually substantial, I think are substantially diverse by comparison to, you know, other similar cohorts. But the, you know, it doesn't really seem to be on the agenda. It doesn't really seem to be at the forefront to think prospectively about diversity of clinical research samples. You know, for example, in our reporting, right, when we put in our progress reports, we have those tables, right, that break down by race and ethnicity, and we all do that. But that's all very much after the fact, right? As opposed to trying to craft, you know, a prospective approach. And this requires, you know, resources and, you know, paradigm shift, and you have to think about how this interacts and interfaces with the rest of the program. But that's very much not a prospective thought process, is kind of what I'm getting at. And I think that there's, you know, room educationally, but I think also just at an operational level for, you know, trying to understand how that can happen. And there may be resources that are needed to be able to do that effectively.
So can I just say something? So, I mean, I think what Michael is saying, like, literally ties in every single theme here. You know, I mean, and I think that what we're missing when we're talking about all of these, when we're discussing all of these threads, is the voice of the community. And we're talking about the community without having the presence of the community. And Victoria, you know, was the first one that brought up, like, excuse me, as a woman of color, I'm very sort of taken aback that this isn't part of the curriculum, right? And Karen echoed that as well. And, you know, in terms of my work, so, you know, Mike, if you want to talk, because right now I'm doing a study on using community health workers in order to recruit patients of color into lupus clinical trials. So, you know, it's getting those trusted community members, because again, there is a lack of trust, right? Like Tuskegee ended in 1973 when it became a known scandal, right? Not because anybody at the NIH put an end to it, right? It was like, oh, this is still a great idea, but it wasn't until it became publicly known that it was actually stopped. So in terms of, you know, when we're talking about this curriculum for scientists, for medical students, regardless, it is how do you become knowledgeable as a practitioner so that you can engender trust within the patients that you study and within the patients that you're going to treat. And for that is that link to the community. So that's the reason for the Bronx tours, and the reason for these cross dialogues is really centering the voice and the perspective and the needs of the community. And I really want us to think very sort of holistically as we put this across. You know, I mean, I think that, you know, Victoria had said in the graduate school courses, there's the history of who discovered it and how they discovered it. And we can take that a step further, right? Marion Sims, OBGYN, right, discovered all of these GYN techniques on slaves, right? How much are we actually talking about this? HeLa cells, right? Whole damn book. How much are we actually reading about it? What Robert Moses did to the Bronx and how that effectively established environmental injustice for the entire borough, right? How much do we actually talk about that? So, I mean, I think that as we think about this, as we think about our curriculum broadly, if we sort of center our community and our patients and our study subjects, that will help to kind of be the nidus to then bring out the spokes of the wheel, right? Of what we need to do and how we address it cross-sectionally throughout everything we do and everything we teach.
Could I just add something to that? So, you know, it makes me think of, you know, sort of a paradigm that in terms of, you know, at least from a, you know, a clinical research and study design point of view. So, I mean, in my own work with some of the things that we've done, there has been need to, for example, develop new instruments to collect. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm invisible. No longer invisible. You know, so you know, I've done things, for example, like run focus groups of the types of people that would make up the study to try and understand the language that should be used and how to develop those instruments, and those are actually things that are now being, you know, used around the world. So I think that in the design phase, that this is something that's maybe not really on the radar. If I think about, you know, I'm somewhat involved in the, you know, with some of my students in the program in clinical investigation, that in terms of the process for, you know, how do you design a study and how do you, you know, delineate who's the cohort and what are the tools you're going to use to reach out to people to try to get them to enroll, or maybe there's a role for community members to be involved in the planning stages, and that actually turns out to be a boon for the study, because those same people, when they're invested, they turn out to be contacts that then let you reach out and get more interest from the relevant community. So that may be something to you know, to think about in terms of building into some of the, you know, training and development that we do with, at least with clinical researchers.
I had no idea you were using CH. I didn't.
I got like 6 jobs, so there you go.
And I think some of this, you know, speaks also to the integration across the institution. When we know that, you know, Montefiore does have a Department of Community Health, they have CHW infrastructure, and our scientists working collaboratively, potentially with that group, to be able to do more research that's relevant for our population. Marla, I know you wanted to speak. I'm sorry you come on the chat.
Yeah, I wanted to, like, I have a question, and then I also wanted to make a comment. I think the language we use matters, and so when we say J. Marion Sims, like, discovered something, what we actually mean is that this person enslaved women, treated them as property, operated on them without anesthesia. Those women were Black, and then his discoveries benefited, like, upper-class white women. And so, like, I think saying discover, right, kind of erases that. The question I had is, I know that there's a search for a new Associate Dean for Medical Education, and I wanted to know what anti-racism background we're gonna require that person to have in order to implement anti-racist curriculum. Who from ODE is gonna be part of that search? Will diversity students be involved in it?
So that job description has been developed. A search committee has been proposed, and the description has been disseminated. There are questions for the search committee have been reviewed, and there are questions about kind of commitment to diversity, as well as understanding the, trying to get a sense of the candidate's understanding of the way that the curriculum can contribute to a more inclusive and bias-free culture. That's the last update that I had on that process. Josh had to leave, so we'll get an update on where things are with that, and go from there. But you know, we do have a faculty search policy that explicitly centers diversity, that requires a diversity officer on each search committee to maintain accountability through the whole process, a statement of diversity from applicants, and encourages the use of standardized questions that center diversity and inclusive culture. I think it hasn't been as explicit around kind of anti-racist skill set, and that's something that we should definitely add. So I really appreciate your comment on that. Jazim, I'm sorry. Oh, it is Jasmine. Okay.
Yeah. Hi, sorry. So I wanted to kind of add to the discussion what was being discussed about making sure to weave history into our curriculums as well. I'm a grad student, like Vicky, so I don't really know what's going on too much on the med side. But one thing that I have seen that is lacking is not only, it's important that we talk about when people say that they discover certain things, what they're really doing when they're taking it for black or brown women or other people of color. But another way to combat that is also to talk about research that is being done by Black and brown people and people of color, because that is something that I do not see in the curriculum as well. On both sides, the grad and the med side, it seems to be. And I feel like if we are, in addition to that, if we are going to have people of color coming to talk about these issues, we have to also realize that we shouldn't have them only be the ones that are talking about this, because we are living this day to day and we only have so much energy. And so we really need our allies to step up as well. And I think it's very helpful if you do have research surrounding certain communities that are written by people within that community, that will help you if you feel like you as a non-Black person or a non-person of color do not feel fit to teach about these subjects.
Okay, we are at 5 minutes past our time. It's been a really rich discussion. I would just like to give anyone an opportunity to put something on the record that's been burning for them. If anyone wants to have a last comment, feel free to speak. And again, we'll be kind of bringing all of this information together, having a clear action plan moving forward. Okay, oh, everyone's frozen? Oh, and they're back. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your ideas, for your commitment to Einstein, because I think that's, you know, what this shows, that people are willing to give up their time to try and make the institution a better institution. So it's much appreciated, and we will continue. This is not the end of the dialogue by any means. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.